next step in Arsenal's history. And so Royal Arsenal have moved on. But before we go into that, can I give a major shout out to Gracie May again, because she's sorted out my channel. I can't believe, honestly. I mean, to get to these subs in 72 hours is awesome. Also, a great mate of mine, Lee Gunner. Mate, what you've done is unbelievable. So if you guys don't subscribe to Lee Gunner and Gracie May, please do, because they are great people. Gracie May has got a new channel and she needs big support, and she's done unbelievable stuff for me. So please go and sub to her. And also, if you're new to this one, please sub to me. Give me a like. If you don't like it, fair play. But we're going to move on. So the year now is 1887-88. And so Royal Arsenal started on common ground. And so they could not charge money for games. This is the main reason they moved to the Sportsman ground. The nearby Sportsman pub was used as a dressing room. Now, that was quite an ironic thing, because football on back in those days was only allowed to be played between 11 and 3 o'clock. So it was quite a tight window for teams to travel to that ground when you look at teams that were coming from a quite distant affair. Now, we're not, as this was a friendly league, they weren't always right just around the corner. So we will see that sometimes things went horribly wrong. So the number of games increased to 23, but only one was competitive against Barnes in London for Arsenal. Now, Barnes were an established club, having taken part in the first ever FA competition in 1871-72. Sadly, they beat Royal Arsenal 4-0 in October 1877. So that was it for Arsenal. But it was their first step into the FA Cup competition. And let's get it right, Arsenal were an amateur team. Barnes were on the verge of becoming professional, although they never did. Now, the thing is that Arsenal were getting to the point of popularity. Spectator interest was increasing, mainly from workers at the Royal Arsenal Foundry. And the fact they were playing on public ground, obviously local people having a look and seeing what's going on and everything like that. So players were coming into the foundry, staff were coming into the foundry from up north, and some of these players were coming from semi-professional clubs, so they were starting to get some interest. So one player in particular that joined was a guy called Peter Connolly and James Hill, two players who helped Arsenal develop. Now, these guys had played at a semi-pro level, because at this point in time, the Football League was starting to get founded in the northern area of the country. Preston North End, Notts County, teams like that. I mean, let's get it right. So the two teams from Arsenal first season were removed from the playlist, which was a bit ironic, because one of these teams was one of the teams that had won an FA Cup. And so that was a bit of a strange situation. And the Rifle Brigade that actually were an army team linked to the Royal Arsenal Foundry. So odd one, that one, because the Royal Arsenal Foundry were supporting Arsenal in a non-financial way, but they were helping the fans to be able to get to sportsman grounds by bus. Interesting. Now, this is where it all starts to change. The first encounter for Arsenal this season is where Arsenal come across Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham Hotspur at this point in time were an amateur club, but because the Wanderers and the other team dropped out, Tottenham Hotspur were invited in. And so the first game Arsenal had to play Tottenham home and away was the pitch that Royal Arsenal played on was basically not the ground, not the sportsman ground, because it was subject to actual terrible flooding. So Arsenal moved to the Manor Ground, and that's where Arsenal's home, Royal Arsenal ground became. So the Manor Field became Arsenal's home ground for the next 2 seasons. But Arsenal's first game against Tottenham was a 6-2 win. And an iconic player that went on to be with Arsenal for quite a period of time, actually, was quite an outstanding guy, actually. Arsenal did well in their first results, but further second season, drawing 13, losing 6, drawing 4. As mentioned earlier, certain Peter Connolly, that guy, went on and scored the most goals for Arsenal that season, is spectacularly scoring 4 in the game against Spurs. So Arsenal are moving on, but there's still deliberation of what's happening. So that game that Arsenal won in 6-2 against Spurs in February 1888 was, not like a derby as it is today, because both teams were amateur, but Connolly was a very, very resourceful player. He could play as a forward, he could play as a centre midfielder in a modern terms, or he could play as a fullback. The guy had great ability to be able to give Arsenal resourcefulness when players were injured. Now, let's get it right. I mean, Arsenal back then, we didn't have a 30-man squad. Arsenal back then probably had about 13, 14 players. And Connolly played for Arsenal their first ever FA Cup game. He went on to earn honours for the Kent Senior Cup, London Charity Cup, London Senior Cup, and a runners-up medal for the London Senior Cup in 1890. So this is probably Arsenal's very first big-known player, in the fact that he had honours. You can't equal this to modern-day players like. Well, how can we compare this man to people like Henry and Bergkamp and Tony Adams? But he was the first Arsenal player to achieve honours for Arsenal. So you have to put him down as a bit of an icon. Now, Royal Arsenal were now attracting crowds of around 90 to 150 people for a home game, still mainly workers from the Foundry. But the founders were looking to move forward, and we're now looking for a better ground. So Arsenal were looking to move forward in even their infant days. They wanted to move and become a bigger team. And now let's be right. This is only their second season, so they had ambition. They wanted to get better, and they decided to show that the Royal Arsenal Foundry, who couldn't financially back Arsenal because Arsenal were an amateur club, but they were getting backed to say, well, come on, let's move, let's go. And the Royal Arsenal Foundry started to say, well, we want you to move to better things. But unfortunately, the FA, which still at that point in time was an amateur basis, but let's quantify what the FA were, because Arsenal were an amateur team and the FA was an amateur setup. But the difference was you had to have a certain amount of fan base to get above an amateur level. Now, you couldn't, because of the structure in them days, like Oxford University had been in the FA Cup, Cambridge University, all the amateur elite universities that wanted to compete in various sports. It was a very strange setup. So what the Arsenal Foundry did was to say, okay, we can't like sponsor you or give you money, but what we'll do is we'll pay to maintain the ground, and we'll build some terracing, very, very basic terracing, because Arsenal were attracting, I mean, look at it, 90 to 120 people, not a great amount, was it? Let's be fair. So what they did is at this stage, fans started to contribute to the support of the club. Now, fans could contribute to support the club because that was deemed as it's not being sponsored or anything like that. So the fans decided that they would unbelievably pay for goal posts, goal nets, and footballs. And an amazing fact is that footballs, proper footballs, professionally made, cost between 12 shillings and £1. Because back then, I'm sure there's going to be loads of guys in the chat will remember, I do as a kid, that they were made out of a pigskin bladder to pump them up, pigskin leather with laced up, and they weighed about £1 dry. On a wet day, they weighed about £3. And when you got one of them on your nut, you'd end up, if you got the laces, you'd have the laces imprinting your face. And if you got one on the top of your head, it, like when it's wet, it would damn near knock you out. And that, I think, sadly, is why so many ex-pros from the 70s are sadly suffering from Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. But that is how Arsenal were moving. Arsenal had ambitions as an amateur club. So we move on. The 88-89 season. Things are starting to change now at Arsenal. So Arsenal, Royal Arsenal, have now moved permanently to the Manor Ground. A decent pitch, a decent ground, and they're starting to build it up. Now, meanwhile, up north, the first football league division has started. And it's quite strange in that the fact that the first division league was up north. No southern clubs were involved, because football at that point in time, Preston North End, Notts County, Notts Forest, and other clubs. Football as a professional game seemed to have more interest up there. So it was a time of change. And the very first season, 1888-89, was won by an amazing team. Preston North End went unbeaten, invincible, the very first Invincibles, and won the very first ever professional FA Cup. Now, the FA Cup had been around for quite a while, because, you know, you had Oxford University, the Wanderers, the Corinthians, and won it as in, excuse me, amateur clubs. But now, time to move in. And, you know, to think that Preston North End, in their first ever season, won basically the first ever double. So we're now moved into this season with Arsenal. Very few of the original players from the first season have remained, but the squad increased, and many of these players became the backbones of the future successes. I mean, players we got in with Humphrey, Barbour, so I say, hard name to pronounce, to be honest. John McBean, Morris Bates, Jimmy Meggs, Richard Hossington, and I'm reading this because I can't remember the names, and David Howard. They all made their first starts for Arsenal, and these players basically became the first, how can I put it, players to give the backbone to a strong Arsenal team that was going to move on. Because when Arsenal were an amateur team, they really didn't have the stalwarts. This lot were the guys, and you'll hear them again as we move on. So the standing in some games is so poor. And I can't, I mean, when I researched this, and I've heard about it, but when I researched it, it was a joke. In a game against Phoenix, a team that Arsenal loved to batter in their early days, right? In December 1888, Royal Arsenal scored, but Phoenix, the club Phoenix, insisted the goal was offside. Now, being the fact it was a gentleman's game back then, and it was an amateur sport, Arsenal agreed. And because we didn't have referees in amateur games back then, that was, you know, old gentlemen, yet shake hands. But after a certain Arsenal player, James Hill, who went on to be one of Arsenal's top strikers as an amateur, the team decided to walk off the pitch because they thought, well, we've been outdone. You've cheated us. So they walked off. So the team then were basically kicked out of that cup competition, which was the London Senior Cup. Now, that was the first time Arsenal got into the London Senior Cup. So, you know, not a good day out, really. But also Arsenal went into the play the Kent Senior Cup, which Arsenal did not help themselves when they refused to play extra time when up against Gravesend. Gravesend turned up late for their home game. And at 3-3, the light was fading, and it was getting cold. by all accounts. So the players again walked off the pitch and got expelled. So the team got expelled because they walked off the pitch, didn't complete the game. So Arsenal in cup competition didn't do themselves a lot of favours, to be fair. Now, the time is coming now where Arsenal are looking to move on. And Arsenal have got some people looking at them because their league record was actually quite decent. And we'll get into the next one on the next video, which I'll probably drop Tuesday, because there are a couple of big names that people who know Arsenal, maybe know the history, will remember. A certain William Norris, bit of a dodgy dealer, but he invested. And we're going to get into the 1991 season where Arsenal went professional. Now, it's getting to the time of Arsenal looking to be a big name. And it's quite funny that you actually think that Arsenal Football Club, couldn't afford to buy a football. And it's madness, really, when you look back at how the club has now developed. So, you know, the fact that the fans were buying the footballs. So, the end of this season, Arsenal went off to play a team, Boston Town, which is like in Lincolnshire. And that's when they received their worst ever defeat, 4-1. But it made a major a turnaround when they actually convinced the Boston Town captain to join Arsenal, a certain man called Bill Julian. And he went on to do great things at Arsenal in their next few seasons. So Arsenal now really are looking to the big time. When we got these guys, and a certain guy I mentioned in the other video earlier, Fred Beardsley, linked to Nottingham Forest. Now he's still hanging around the club. He's no longer playing for the club, but he's a very, very influential man in the now professional world up north. So we'll see what he brings in to give Arsenal their ability to move on. So we'll see how Arsenal develop, and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, it's going to get better because Arsenal are going to go professional, and this is where it all starts to change. So if you enjoyed it, people, thank you very much. Thanks for all the love that you've already given me, and like and subscribe to Gracie May. She's a lovely young lady who has done wonders for me in helping me set this channel up. And thank you very much. And I look forward to the next one where we go professional. Big up.